All right, so today I have with me Majet Reyes, and she is a trauma therapist and business owner. How are you doing today?
I am doing really well. I'm excited to be here. Being in your presence is always a delight. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk today because I know so many people are going to be able to resonate with your story and, the work that you do. And I know so many people need to hear so many things. So thanks so much for coming on. So let's start with you. Like, tell us a little bit about, your beginnings and kind of how you maybe got to your path.
Yeah. So when I introduce myself, I always say I'm a former paramedic and now a trauma therapist, helping people find fulfillment through counseling, community, and consulting. Um, and right now, I have my own private practice in Northern Liberties, and I help mostly first responders and medical professionals, helpers and teachers, and also creatives. I have been doing that for 7 years now. And I also own Diva Girl, and Diva Girl is a community of women, and we host conferences, workshops, and volunteer trips abroad. But before I became a Diva Girl, and before I became a trauma therapist, my story, I'm gonna start with the time when I moved to the United States. I'm an immigrant. I came to the U.S. when I was 16. I'm from the Philippines. And that has its own trauma, and me not realizing that's traumatic for a teenager to leave all her friends, right? To leave the life that that I've known for 16 years behind, and move to the United States and start a new life with my parents. And my parents at that time were my age now, right? Like my parents at that time were in their mid 40s. And my dad was an artist photographer. He's a photojournalist in the Philippines, and he loved his job. And my mom was an executive for the ombudsman, right? So she worked with lawyers, and she was a teacher and then worked her way up into that. So my parents were very stable grown-ups in my life with very amazing, awesome careers in the Philippines that were able to provide me with a really good education, all that good stuff, right, in the Philippines. So it was a great childhood. Of course, there are traumas that we're not going to talk about today that happened then. But moving to the United States as immigrants, I saw my parents struggle starting from scratch, right? And all the things that they worked so hard for to become who they were in the Philippines, were all taken off, and they had to start from that. My dad worked as a dishwasher for a Chinese restaurant when we first came to the United States, and then my mom had to work in a factory, right? And seeing them struggle with that, and me as a teenager and trying to make friends, right, and trying to adjust and be accepted in this in this new country was a struggle for me too. So we were all struggling at the same time, when we first came here, and that was back in the 90s. And then from that, not realizing that there was just accumulation of trauma, right? And then 9/11 happened, and when 9/11 happened, and I was already in college back then. I was going to go for nursing school, taking up prerequisites for nursing school, because this is a stereotype. Most Filipinos in the United States are either nurses, or in the Navy, or in the medical field, doctors, or like in the medical field, or accountants. Right, or in the Navy. So anyway, so I'm like, I don't like numbers. I don't, I like helping people. So I like science. I'm gonna go for nursing. So I was studying for that, and then 9/11 happened, and I saw, we saw buildings collapsing. It was, and people dying and running away from the building, and I saw people going into the building, people in uniforms. And I thought, oh, like, who are they? Right? They're firefighters, cops, and there was another profession that I wasn't familiar with at that time. And I was like, who are they? And they were paramedics, right? EMTs and paramedics. And I didn't know the difference yet at that time. And I thought, oh, I want to be able to do that. I don't know. I was very patriotic at that time. And I'm like, I want to give back to this country that's going through this turmoil. I was like in my early 20s during that time. And I was like, like, I know I don't want to be a firefighter. I know I don't want to be a cop, but I want to be a paramedic, right?
Mhm.
It has a medical background to it, and you wear a uniform and you go into, and save people's lives. Like, so that was like my idea. So I became a paramedic. So I went to paramedic school. I was an EMT first, and then 2 years of paramedic school, and I became a paramedic. And my goal at that time in my 20s was to retire as a paramedic, work for the fire department, do 911 calls and answers to people's call, and show up during the hardest times of their lives. And I did that for 13 years. But during that course, another traumatic event happened in my life. I was assaulted by my coworkers when I was working as a paramedic, and that was something that I didn't realize had a big impact on me. Like when that happened, my world fell apart, right? And then when that my life was falling apart at that time, I didn't stop. I still worked. I worked a lot. I actually added more jobs. I worked as a bartender. I worked as a paramedic. Like I just busied myself so much more. But I was also working out a lot. I was in the best shape of my life. I was working a lot, and also but I was falling apart during that time. And then and I know, Tammy, I'm going. It is a long story. Just like feel free to stop me at any point.
You're good.
So okay.
Keep going.
So I was working out a lot. I was busy. I was working. I was paying my taxes and all that stuff. And I was drinking a lot too, right? Because those are all normal stuff, right? Those are normal. Everybody does that. And I did that, not knowing that my life was falling apart and I'm so dysregulated. And I was I was diagnosed with PTSD and anxiety and also depression at that time, but I didn't care about all those diagnoses, right? I'm like, oh, those are not real. I'm going to keep working. All I need to do is just be busy, right? Party, busy, worked out, and work. Until one day I realized, one night I was like, I couldn't sleep. So that was one of my troubles. I couldn't sleep at night. So what I did was, like I just want to sleep, and I'm so tired because I was working and doing all that stuff. And I'm like, you know what? I just need to go to sleep, and I'm gonna take all my sleeping pills, and I'm going to drink this whole bottle of vodka, and no intention of suicide, right? No, not none of that. All I wanted was to go to sleep because I was so tired, and I couldn't sleep. Right? I couldn't sleep because my nervous system is dysregulated at that time, and I had so much anxiety that I've been denying. Right? So I'm like, I just want to sleep. Right? And at that time, pot was not legal. I smoked all the pot that I had. Right? And and I just wanted to go to sleep. So I took all that and I listened to music, and I was like, okay, now I'm finally gonna be able to sleep. And then you're not realizing that I'm tired of life at that time, right? And then the next day I woke up and I'm like, oh, I woke up, right? I woke up and I'm like, crap, what was I really trying to do at that time? Right. And I know, and like I'm alive, obviously. And but then I had this really bad headache. But I'm just like, okay, something has to change. Right. This is not health. And that was the turning point. Right. Like I had to hit rock bottom to be able to be like, oh shoot, like this needs to change. What I was doing, working my butt off, working out, partying, was not sustainable. And that's not what's gonna make me happy or heal. Right. So I devoured all this self-help book, went to Barnes and Noble, self-help, self-help magazines and all that stuff, right? And then and then I went back to school, and I still work as a paramedic. And it started some steps through self-help, of changing my life. But I still didn't seek therapy at that time. And and then until I became a mother. So fast forward, right? Like over 10 years, I became a mom, and I knew that when I had my daughter, I wanted my daughter to be happy. And I was like, oh my God, I can't tell this kid, right? Be happy if I'm not happy, right? And I knew one of the things that's not making me happy is the job that I have, right? And and many other aspects. I wasn't feeling fulfilled. So I thought, okay, I need to change gears. I need to change my job. Um, and I knew I didn't want to be a paramedic, but I wasn't sure what should I do? And I'm like, a lot of paramedics become ER doctors, PAs, or nurses. I'm like, okay, let me apply to all that, right? And I applied, I got rejected, back, back, reject, until I got on my knees and I prayed. Like I'm spiritual. I'm not very religious, but I pray and I believe in a higher being. I said, yo, you tell me what you want me to do, right? Like, you tell me how you want me to serve people, right? Like I don't know, but I know for a fact that I don't want to be a paramedic anymore, right? It doesn't fulfill me. The hours and what it does to my body and to my mind was not sustainable for me. And I have this daughter to take care of, right? Um, and a few days later, I got a postcard. And the postcard was from Jefferson University, which was Philadelphia University back then. And it was a program for community and trauma counseling. And that word trauma really like was highlighted for me, and I'm like, oh well, I'm a paramedic. Like, I was like this, I'm a paramedic. Every day I go to work and exposed to trauma, and not thinking that that trauma is very different. It's everybody has gone through it, and it's very different ways of people experiencing trauma. So I went to the school, to Jefferson University, and I went to their orientation time, and I fell in love with the teachers, with the former students, and I'm like, okay, well, maybe this is a sign that this is where I'm supposed to go. So I took that as a sign. I signed up for the program, and loved, and challenged enough, like in the program, and realized that, shoot, I had to heal. I have to do my own therapy, right? And through that journey of being a student, and it was for my master's, a community and trauma counseling program, I realized that I need to do my own therapy. I need to find my own therapist and seek counseling and process all those significant events that happened in my life that made me who I am, right? And that's when my healing happens. And as I was becoming a trauma therapist, and and yeah, now fast forward 7 years later, I work with mostly first responders, and creatives and teachers, and and I love what I do. Like, I love what I do so much that I make sure that I rest. I make sure that I do the things that I enjoy, like traveling, and resting, because I want to show up as like my best self for my clients, because I love what I do so much that like, I'm grateful that I get to do it, that I want to take care of myself so I can continue doing what I love. So that's a very long story of how I became who I am now. But that is my story, and I'm sorry it took up a lot of time.
Oh, it is okay. Thank you so much for sharing all of that, and so honestly and openly, like, and it's crazy how some of our stories intertwine a little bit, like having that rock bottom and then just like begging whoever is above, like whoever we believe in, like, please give me a sign. What do I need to do? And then finding the path. And I think like there's something so, in a way, like beautiful about rock bottom. Like there can be for many like hope and transformation and everything. So I'm so glad, it led you to where you are today and to be able to talk to you today. So can you define for us, like, then what is trauma? Maybe for somebody who hears the word, you know,
Mhm.
uh, thrown around here and there, but hasn't gone to therapy or looked within.
Yeah, no, I appreciate this question, right? Because trauma, a lot of people would think is like something major happened, like a big accident or a death or an assault, right? Or war, right? And but trauma is actually not the event, right? Trauma is not the event. And when it comes to mental health, right? Trauma is the felt experience that was not processed, right? It wasn't processed. We didn't talk about it because we didn't feel safe enough to be able to express that felt experience, right? With another person, with someone, right? So, because that felt experience was not processed, right? We are holding on to it in our bodies, right? And then that's the one that gets triggered, right? and then we see triggers, and then our body feels it, and we don't understand, like, why am I feeling anxious, why am I feeling afraid, why am I feeling really lonely, why am I feeling so affected by it, right? Because it's our trauma that we have been holding on for such a long time that hasn't been processed. So, like, yes, there is the big T's, what they call it, the big traumas, which is what we're familiar with: war, rape, assault, accident, death, right? And there's the little T's, right? And that's the little traumas, which a lot of us have experienced. And those are the felt experiences wherein we felt neglected, abandoned, shamed, right? Shamed is such a big thing, right? Blamed, right? Judged, right? Or those moments that we were not seen or heard or validated, right? Those are traumatic, especially to a child who all, a child wants, like, we are who we this and this is what I say as a trauma therapist. I believe that we are who we are because of what happened to us, right? And those little events that happen in our lives growing up, the way the grown-ups, especially the grown-ups, made us feel, right, is something that retains in our brain, right? And then we learn how to survive that. And if we felt unheard, unseen, right, shame, judge, right, growing up, then those are little felt experiences we're having, like, oh, I'm not good enough. Oh, I didn't give enough, right? Oh, I didn't please my grown up, right? Whether that's my parents, my mom, right? Or my dad, or, or a teacher, right? Because all we wanted, as a child is to be seen and to be loved, to be accepted, right? And if we don't consistently feel that way, right? The love, acceptance, attuned to, then those are little traumas in our lives. Those are the little traumas that retains in our brain, and then we develop this defensive mechanisms of, like, oh, I need to be a people pleaser, oh, I need to be, like, a perfectionist, oh, I need to be, like, what else, like all those the defense mechanisms that we do, that we think is normal because it was normalized, right? Because we had to learn these things to cope with those little felt experiences, those little traumas that we had growing up. So it's complex, right? It's not just that big, not necessarily, like, a big event that happened, right? And a lot of people come to me and tell me, like, oh, I never had any traumas in my life. I'm like, oh yeah, okay. Tell me about your, like, let's talk, tell me your story. And then, and then it highlights those felt experiences that they had growing up, that made them who they are as a grown up now. So yeah.
I partly feel like, for me, I feel like it's the little traumas that, like, I feel like that is what has impacted me the most, in a sense, like, or at least with my, it's like, they all get collected, and like, I feel like over time, that those have been like the ones that, made me, when I was younger, like, become a people pleaser, or worry about this, that, and the other. How do you see, how can trauma then affect, like, our health and our body? Um,
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that part of, like, like for you, like those little events that that accumulate, right? And turn into, like, somebody who's a people pleaser. You said that. And I say this, I find myself saying this out loud a lot, is like, I'm a recovering people pleaser, right? And and to 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 answer that question that you have, like, how it affects our body, right? Like, this anxiety is one of the popular, not popular, popular is not the right word, most common ways of how trauma shows, like a sign and symptoms of trauma, right? Like our heart rate goes up, we have shortness of breath, and and we freeze, right? Like those are, like, or we start doing things, right? Like the stress responses is what I would call it. Like, so the way traumas affect our bodies is that, it shows up in many different ways, the way we react to stresses, right? So, and we call it the stress responses, and that's the fight, flight, freezer mode, freeze or fawn mode, right? So those are the different stress responses that we have. And when there's a stress, either we go on our fight or flight mode or a freeze or fawn mode. And how does that show up in our body? It shows up in many different ways in people. I don't know if I'm answering your question of like how trauma is affecting our body.
You are.
Am I in the
Yeah.
right direction? Okay.
Hmm.
So, so, so yeah, and like like when we have stressors that show up in our lives, like our bodies can feel a way. We can respond to that as um, we get into our fight or flight mode, and fight mode is usually like we get our defenses up, and then we get angry. Right, we react in this ways when we feel like we need to defend ourselves, right? And and then flight is when we stress comes up, and then we want to do things. We want to do, and a lot of times it's sort of like we want to control things. These are the type A's who want to busy up, and that was totally me, right? Like you want to keep yourself busy, and and that's how you respond to stressors that come into your life, right? And then the freeze mode is when we feel like when a stressor happens, we want to hide, we want to isolate, we want to stay away from people, right? And it's like we're frozen, we can't do anything, and a lot of times we find ourselves scrolling on social media, binge watching TV, right? Or video games, right? We want to numb it, so we're going to isolate. And same with the flight mode, we want to numb that feeling, right? That when stress comes up or when there's a stressor, we want to numb it, so we're going to keep ourselves busy, right? And then you have the fawn mode, and the fawn mode is where people pleasers fall into, right? Like a stressor come up, and all we wanted to do is to please other people. What can I do to satisfy or make this other person happy? I'm gonna do everything, that we're neglecting ourselves, right? And what we really need to do when we're at that, if we're that type, we need to really have better boundaries. So I'm saying this, and also reminding people that these are not wrong, right? These responses are not wrong. And these responses are our ways of survival, right? We learn these survival skills. We learn all the fight or ways of us fight or flight or freeze or fawn. These are our ways of surviving. Because at some point in our lives, in our younger years, we learned these coping mechanisms. These are coping mechanisms, and they're not wrong. It served us when we were younger, right? When we were going through that part of our lives. But then when we get older, we realize that, oh, this is not serving me anymore, right? And being able to understand that, oh, this is the type of response that I do when I'm stressed, right? And where did I learn that from, right? Oh, well, I learned that because like my mother had wanted me to be somebody who who's quote unquote perfect, to always do good grades. And if I don't do good grades, if I get a C, then she will be really mad, and I don't like it when my mother's mad. So I want to make sure that I do everything I can to make her happy, keep her happy. So I'm going to be a perfectionist. I'm going to do work really hard to get perfect A's or whatever, right? So it's like being able to learn that, understand it, and realize that, okay, that served me before, but now in my grown up state, I can be more kind to myself, right? And I could relax more, and not be in survival mode, right? So yeah, those are some of the ways like that trauma shows up in our lives, in our bodies, and how we react to them when stressors show up.
I definitely feel like I always had shut down a little bit when like the stressors, like I can't even deal with it. Like I can't even do it. Like let me do something else. And like I find, I mean, I'm aware of it, but I have been finding myself like doing a little bit of the scrolling. So I'm like, like stop. Don't do that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
and and it's not, and we need to remind ourselves like, okay, like that's not wrong, right? We're not going to judge ourselves for that, because sometimes stressors can be overwhelming, and we had to, like, we had to find a way to soothe, our nervous system. And but being able to, like what you said, like becoming aware of, like, oh, I'm going into my, my freeze mode, right? Like I'm isolating, and I'm totally numbing, right? So I need to pause, and I need to, to recognize that this is what I'm doing. And why am I doing this? Oh, because I'm feeling overwhelmed. Why am I feeling overwhelmed? Right? Oh, because there's so many things that I need to do, and I'm just like so overwhelmed right now. Like giving ourselves that moment to just like break it down instead of like judging, right? Oh my God, I'm on my phone for like 2 hours now. Like that's so shameful, right? Like, and it's like, instead of doing that, like instead being kind to ourselves and be like, okay, why am I doing this? Right? And why am I feeling overwhelmed? Why, why, I have all these things that I need to do. Like, okay, like those are valid reasons why I'm trying to numb this overwhelming feeling, right? But is this serving me right now? No, it's not serving me anymore, right? So what can I do now to be able to stay present, right? And do what I need to do, action I need to take to be able to feel better. So, yeah.
I like how you emphasize being kinder to ourselves because I feel like even though, you know, I've worked on the self-love journey and I feel like good, I noticed that I was still scolding myself a little bit or like, when it came to like shutting down, for example, like, oh, like you should have been working or like stuff like that. So I noticed I noticed that for sure, for
Yeah.
sure. Now, when you were working as a in like as an EMS, what did you notice between like your like coworkers? What were some of the other things, that they were going through? Were they also feeling, stressed and anxious and things or
Yeah. We're really good. Like, even the people I work with now, like in my counseling, like, first responders are really good at compartmentalizing. Um, and it's a survival mechanism that serves us really well during our shifts, right? But then it's not sustainable, right? So what happens is that in the life of a first responder, you go to your work, and let's say it's a 12-hour shift, which is typical, 12-hour shift of uncertainties. You don't know what call you're gonna get, what kind of help someone needs, right? And when that alarm goes off, you have to jump in the truck and then go to the call, whether that is saving lives or just being present for someone, or being a cab, right? Taking someone to the hospital, right? Because they don't have other means to get to the hospital. And every time you get on a call, there's a certain feeling that starts to come up, whether that's anger or fear, right? Or worry or sadness. Because, right, you're faced with deaths, you're faced with like a life or death situation. And there are those BS calls, what they call like bullshit calls, right? And like they it's not an emergency, they could go to their doctor. Hey, there are those calls, right? And so different emotions will come up for you, right? When you and plus you're hungry, right? Or you needed to pee, because there could be days or nights when it's back-to-back calls that you don't get a chance to pause and take a breather or even pee or eat, right? So as a first responder, you learn how to suppress your emotions, right? Suppress that, right? And so that you can go on to the next call, right? You show up on a call, you see the situation, right? Now it was an uncertainty, right? They give you like a very basic saying, like, oh, like shortness of breath. And that can range, like you can get a call and it will only say shortness of breath or the age or the gender of the person that you're going to show up for. And then that's all. And you can show up as if someone like, it's a life and death situation, or it's somebody having an asthma attack, or somebody who's has a cold, right? So it's like you don't know until you get there. And then when you get there, you like all these emotions will show up, but then you have to suppress that, right? Because how can you help this person if if your emotions had taken over? So you have to suppress that, you have to compartmentalize that to be able to do your job and then get on the next call. So when this happens, right, you compartment. So for 12 hours you're compartmentalizing, compartmentalizing, compartmentalizing. You never get a chance to process those emotions. Remember when I was talking earlier, trauma is that felt experience that was not processed, right? So for 12 hours, for that whole shift, no traumas, no felt experience was processed during that time, right? So here comes this first responder coming home, right? Coming home, defenses are down, and then their significant other or their child do something that's irritable. Bam! Then all the emotions flooded in, right? Either that's anger, annoyance, right? Sadness, anxiety, everything will just come out, right? And then when that happens, it's like it hurts the feelings of their significant other, it hurts their child, and then they realize, oh my God, this is wrong, right? I shouldn't feel this, right? But then that's the first time you get a chance to process your emotions, right? To feel it. So what do? We drink, right? We need to numb these emotions, right? So there's no place to process the emotions that you compartmentalize and suppress for 12 hours. So what are you going to do now? You're going to, you don't want to just spill it out. You don't have anybody to process this with. So we're going to numb it. So either we scroll on social media or we numb with watching TV. We eat a lot, right? We learn how to self-soothe, drink or other substances to numb it, right? So that's, it doesn't happen to all first responders, no, right? No. But there's a big number of first responders who are struggling with that. And it is because of that not being able to process those felt experiences throughout the day, right? Because of compartmentalizing. So, yeah.
That's like a recipe for, I hear, like from what you're saying, I hear a recipe for trauma. You're just compartmentalizing and like pretending almost like you don't have emotions and oh, can't feel anything. So I totally hear and can see like why, some people go home and start getting into soothing habits. And from what you're saying too, it reminds me, well, of course, kind of across the board, different medical professions have to, like doctors and nurses have to do, the same. I know of, but with teachers too, it's kind of reminding me
I was just gonna say,
of
oh my
teaching because yeah, because you go to work and you have to pretend everything's happy joy joy basically, and that there's no problems with the education system or principals, and you can't have emotions even though your students dad just got hurt really badly, or now he's in jail and now this kid's sad, and it's like you can't have emotions towards that, like because you gotta get the show on the road. So I definitely see the compare the what's the word, similarities from what you're
God.
saying.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yes, you don't want to just, spill out your emotions at like, in front of fourth graders. So you don't want to do it, like I understand, but then how can you find ways, right? Like even for, for teachers, for first responders, for nurses, right? Like and doctors, it's like look for ways wherein you feel safe enough, right? Not judge, to express, right, those feelings, right, to express those feelings, to process those feelings, right? And a lot of times, well, now, like there are outlets now, like happening with when it comes to mental health, right? We're talking more about it. Emotions are not stigmatized anymore. Mental health is not. It's There's still a stigma. I shouldn't say
Hmm.
there's no stigma. There's still a stigma, but but we're more welcoming of it. Right, we're more open to it. But when you look at it in the past, it's like, no, you don't. Like, why are you emotional, right? Like they use that as a, you've heard this, like, oh, you're being emotional, right? Like it's such a bad thing, but we're humans. Of course we have emotions, right? Like, so it's like, how can we find ways? right? Like to be able to process those felt experiences, those emotions that we had about a particular event that happened in our day, right? Because those feelings, those emotions are not wrong, right? I don't like it when people say, "Why are they sad? They shouldn't be sad." And I go, "Well, that's how they feel. It is sad, right?" Like, oh, they should be strong and they should just keep pushing forward. Well, their dad was just incarcerated, right? Like, or I just witnessed my one of my students feeling sad. Like, teachers, a lot of teachers are very empathetic, right? Like, of course, I will feel some type of emotion with that. Why is that wrong? Right? Or even anger. Anger is not wrong. Right. Like, it angers me that, that the students are not getting the resources that they need. Right. Like the fight mode, right? The fight mode when it comes to stress responses, like these are not wrong. We have to pause and listen, like, why are we feeling this way? What do we need to advocate for? Right? What is it that we wanted to do? Like it's not wrong. These emotions are not wrong. So finding ways to be able to feel safe enough to process those feelings are truly important.
And how would you suggest that somebody can do that? Like, maybe in work, but then also maybe like when they get home.
Yeah. And that's when, when I hope there are more workplaces that, that allows, their employees to have like groups, right? A safe space or groups or a support group wherein they can share the joys and the challenges of their profession. Right? These people are teachers, these people are nurses and doctors and first responders because there's a great reason for it. And they're doing this because they love something about it. But and basically a lot of times they want to help people, right? And them knowing that they're helping people is the joy of their job, the joys of their job, right? And of course, with that, there are the challenges, right? There are a lot of challenges in those professions. And being able to share that with individuals who understand the joys and the challenges of that profession is truly important. And I wish more workplaces do that, right? And then, but it's not common, right? Unfortunately, it's
Mhm.
not common. Um, uh, Obviously seeing a therapist who will give you a space, right, wherein you will feel seen, heard, and validated, right, and be able to process the emotions that you're having. And then if you don't have access to a therapist, then journaling, right, is something, it's a great way, it's an outlet to be able to express and not filter your feelings and emotions, right? Just writing it all down and expressing it. You gotta have an outlet for it. And there are different ways now. Dancing is a great way of expressing your feelings, right? Boxing is a great way of expressing, and it's an outlet for your feelings, for your emotions, right? But there's something that's super healing when we're able to use words, right? And express and share how we're feeling, especially as a grown up, right? So a good friend, if you have it, right? If you have a really good friend you trust, and that friend can make you feel seen, heard, validated, and not project their own experiences or their own biases or their own, hurt and pain, then great, you're lucky. Yeah, you're lucky to have a friend who you can share that with, right? Or a significant other, right? But yeah, I hope that like if you have another person to share that and to process that experience with, is definitely healing for us. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm hearing community for what you're saying. I'm hearing that.
Community, yes,
Yes. So,
yes, it sums it all
and
up. Yeah,
and
community,
that's like a
yes.
theme across almost every person that I've had on more recently.
Yeah.
It's like having a community is so important and having, because we're not meant to be alone. We're not meant to be, fending for ourselves and everything. So, yeah, I think when it comes to grief too, like, yes, community is so important. But I like how you mentioned some workplaces are having the community aspect or like the support group. And I think one of the things that made me like curious when, after teaching and like looking now, it's like, are some of the people that you meet there, some of them, become your like genuine friends. They are your friends. You like them, but are some of the relationships like trauma bonding? Can you speak a little bit
Yeah.
on that? Like, I know that's a term I've heard a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, like that trauma bond, right? Like um from my understanding, right, trauma bond is something that you it's a recreation of something that happened in your childhood, right? And you're trying to resolve the unresolved issue that happened in your childhood, right? And you see that, right? You see that with another individual. And so you are attracted to that individual, like you gravitate towards that individual. And then, and then you try to resolve the unresolved issue that you have from your parents or from growing up with this new individual in your grown-up life, right? So that's trauma bonding. That's my understanding of it, and that's how I see it. Is it healthy? Right? That's the question. Right? We have to think about, like, is this healthy? Are you recreating something that, are you recreating and you're finding yourselves in this relationship, in these patterns, right? That are unhealthy and ending up in, in a repeated pattern, like in a bad situation or hurtful situation, right? Like you find yourself like, oh, like I'm with the same guy who, or the same person who who abandoned me, right? And if you look at your childhood, right, like you felt abandoned or neglected by one of your parents, right? And then you find yourself trauma bonding with another individual who subconscious, it's all subconscious, right? And you're feeling like, okay, like this person has that, like not exactly the qualities, but has the tendencies to not be emotionally available or not be, present all the time, right? Because I'm subconsciously fulfilling that narrative that I've had, as a child, that I am not worth it. Right? This person is going to abandon me and neglect me, just like what one of my parents did. Right? So we find ourselves in the same pattern with the same people and trauma bonding with them, and trying to resolve what was unresolved in our past. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. You clarified that for me because I thought the definition was more like something different. So that was definitely clarification that I needed for for that
But
definition.
here's another thing too. So here's another thing too, right? You can resonate with someone and relate with someone because you've had the same experiences or felt experiences, right? And then you come together, right? And then instead of um fulfilling is not the right word. Like instead of like the narrative that you have, right? Validating the narrative that you have by this person, um let's stay with abandonment, like this person is going to abandon and neglect me, like stay with that person and then heal with that person, right? Like you can stay in that race and heal together, right? Ask it. And how do you heal that? Asking for what you need, expressing how you feel, showing up in this relationship, and just being really transparent, and and healing. But that healing starts with you, right? Because you can still find yourself with individuals who reminds you, right, of somebody from your past, but then you have to resolve it somehow. So how are you going to resolve that past, right? And maybe this is the opportunity to be with this person to be able to heal that part of you. It's not the other person's responsibility, it's your responsibility. If this person is just reminding you, hey, you have unresolved issues that you need to solve, go heal that, right? So you pause, and and then you heal yourself, and then and your healing can have a healing effect on the other person, right? The person you're trauma bonding with, and they were like, oh, like this person is not abandoning me, right? Because if this person stays and really shows you acceptance and love, and you're not healed, you're going to be like, this is not normal. I'm not used to this. I'm going to sabotage this relationship and push this person away, right? Because we wanted to fulfill like that narrative that we're not worth it, right? So it's like staying there, healing yourself, And then, and then showing up as a healed individual with this other person, so the other person can also see you, right, if they're healthy enough, and do their own work, right, and then stay together, and 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 have each other feel seen and heard and validated. I don't know if I'm making sense, but yeah, it trauma bond can be with an individual who is a reminder of an unresolved issue that you had from your past, and you can stay there and heal yourself, or you can continue this pattern of the narrative that you had developed as a child.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification because that definitely was helpful for sure. So, I know you mentioned a few of the things that one could do, but is there anything else that like you do recommend somebody that is in, these professions where, you are helping people, where, you know, it is a job that you love and you feel rewarded, but maybe like monetarily you don't. Like is there anything else that you would recommend or advice that you have for those individuals that are in these, positions?
Yeah. And I want to remind these professionals, right? Teachers, first responders, nurses, and doctors that they are important. They are very important in the community.
Mhm.
And without them, it's not sustainable for the world. It's not sustainable for our country. It's not sustainable in the communities. They are important. Therefore, they need to take care of themselves. We
Mhm.
need them to put themselves first. They need to take care of themselves, really work on their self preservation, and get rid of that badge of self neglect, right? Um, for many years, these professions have a culture of glorifying self neglect, right? And we need to really get away from that and put ourselves first, prioritize ourselves, self preservation, take care of ourselves, find joy activities that brings us joys, and so that we can show up for other people, for the communities, you know, fully, right? So that you can continue doing the job that you signed up for, right? And when you're showing up, loving yourself first, right? Self-preservation is about self-love. When you love yourself, right? Love yourself first before your family, before your kids, before your patients, before your job, before your students. Love yourself first. Because when you love yourself first, you're only going to show up for others fully, right? And you're only going to spread love, right? And and that's important. And you're very important in our communities. Therefore, we would love for you to put yourself first and love yourself first, right? So you're not going to be resentful showing up for us, showing up for your students, showing up for your patients, showing up for the community. So, yeah.
Emphasize everything you just said. I love that you said that, their job is so essential and important because without, all of those individuals, those are essential people in our society and we need them. And I think like you said, they're so used to in their work putting everybody before themselves, but they
Mhm.
need to put themselves first too. And I think that was one of the lessons that I had growing up, like watching my mom, because she was a nurse, and I noticed, she was taking care of everybody at work, and then like her family, because her parents were always sick, and then she'd come home and take care of us. But it was like, what did she do for herself? And it was
Mhm.
like nothing. So that's kind of one of the missions from the work that I do is just to teach and share the message that we need, like you're saying, to love ourselves first, to do things to take care of ourselves because our health is so precious and valuable. And if we are not showing up for ourselves, then we can't show up for anybody else in our life. And I
One-
wholeheartedly believe that.
100%. And I don't know if you've heard of Gabor Mate. Have you heard of Dr. Gabor Mate?
Heard, but I'm not familiar.
Yeah. So he's excellent. And he talked about that saying, the good die young, You've heard of that saying, right? Only the good die, and it's
Mhm.
also a song, right? I think it's
Right.
who sang that? I forget, I think it's Billy Joel. Only the good die
Right.
young. And people and the good because they put others first, right? The good die young because they have been putting others first and neglecting themselves, right? And so they die young, right? And they have done studies and research where in people who have cancer, right? And Gabor Mate was talking about this. And people who have cancer who die young are usually caretakers, caregivers, who had been, putting other people first. And they're always the nicest. And they say that, not always, but a lot of times they are the nicest people in the world because they have been neglecting themselves, unfortunately. So, yeah, and taking on
Mhm.
everybody else's stresses, and not loving themselves more.
Right, and that stress is unmanaged stress can lead to so many illnesses,
Mm.
sicknesses, burnout, you name
Yeah,
it. It's
yeah,
crazy. And
100%.
and some people like I feel like wear it like a badge of honor or like glorify it like, I'm busy, busy, busy and I'm stressed like but I don't know. I always try to remember like it's not that you're stressed, well, you're stressed, but like your body's under stress too. So that's one of the things I try to remember.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's 100% true. I agree with you. It's like when our excuse me, then our body takes on, like it's not just our mind being affected by the stress, right? It's like our whole body feel it. It gets affected by it for sure. Like, and it shows up as like gray hair or sometimes, acne or, like these are just the simple stuff, right? But for
Mhm.
other people, it's like flare ups, right? Like stomach ache, headache, joint pain, right? So it shows up like, physically,
Mhm.
right? Like stress shows up too. And we put a diagnosis to it, like, fibromyalgia, right? Or, um, other immune diseases, right? Because of stress. So yeah, 100%, I agree with you. Mm.
Yeah, it's so crazy. Can you tell us then a little bit about your business that you own? Because I know the event's coming up soon, so definitely
Yeah.
tell us all about everything.
Yeah. So I have this other business and it's called Diva Girl. And and this is when I work with a lot of amazing women business owners. And we have this amazing event coming up, and it's our ninth wellness conference, and we're focusing on the reproductive wellness. Women's reproductive wellness, and we're calling it the VCon, wherein we're going to talk about menstruation, menopause, perimenopause, gut health, boobs, vagina, and we're going to have experts on that. We're going to have a panel. And of course, we're going to have fitness instructors too and grounding instructors. And we have you, Tammy,
Mhm.
who will be
Yay.
doing a grounding exercise for us with your singing bowls, and and that will help our attendees ground themselves and and feel more present, and be more in tune in their bodies, right? So yeah, and that is on May 21st, and I invite everyone who could come, and enjoy the conference with us. It's going to be more than 200 women with 30 presenters, 20 vendors to shop from, and it's gonna be a good time.
I'm
Yeah.
so excited. I can't wait to bring the sound bowls there. And what's a good website for them to find the tickets and stuff? Like I'll put
Yes.
everything in the show notes too, but
Yeah, definitely. So you can get your tickets at www.divergirlwellnesscon23.eventbrite.com.
perfect. Is there anything else that you want to add or anything before we sign?
Um, Take care of yourself and put yourself first. And and attending events like this wherein you're surrounded by other women, celebrating being a woman, right, is a great opportunity um to to honor yourself, and prioritize yourself so you can show up for others, the way that you want to, instead of resenting them. So take care of you first.
I love that. And can you let them know where to find you?
Yes, so you can find me on Instagram at Diva Girl Community, or for mental health, you can find me on Instagram at Philly Trauma Counselor. And yeah,
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been such an informative and, conversation, and I know so many people are going to have takeaways and hopefully if they're not already implementing some of the things that you suggested, maybe reconsidering and putting themselves first.
yes. Thank you so much, Tammy. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon.
See ya.